Hey, everybody, welcome to your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very glad to have you along with me today for another very interesting conversation around the issues in and around retirement. And if this is something that you find yourself tuning into on a regular basis, or retirement issues in general are on your radar, I hope that you'll take a second, subscribe to our free newsletter as well. You can find it at protectedincome.org/subscribe. If you are not yet retired, though, the next time that you are in the workplace, I want you to take a look around, because odds are its makeup is a lot different today than it was at the start of your career. And that is because for the very first time in history, workplaces have up to 5 different generations of people, often working side by side. And this changing dynamic is what my guest today refers to as a new kind of diversity. And with it comes advantages, disadvantages, and the sort of issues that we are going to parse. Dr. Tim Elmore is the founder and CEO of the Atlanta-based nonprofit Growing Leaders. Since its founding in 2003, Tim has spoken to over 500,000 leaders in business, universities, athletic teams, and nonprofit organizations, including a long list of names that you would recognize, including Home Depot, Coca-Cola, American Eagle, Chick-fil-A, and as I was just learning, the Buffalo Bills, San Francisco Giants, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Ohio State University, and many, many others. He is the author of 35 books, which is incredible, including his latest, which is called A New Kind of Diversity, Making the Different Generations on Your Team a Competitive Advantage. And last but not least, he was named one of the top 100 leadership speakers in the country by Inc. magazine. Tim, very, very glad to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, it's great to be with you, Jean. It was fun to have our little pre-chat, so I can hardly wait for the online chat here.
Me too. Let me just remind everyone, we like these chats not to just be a two-way street, but to be a conversation. If you're watching and you've got comments or you've got questions, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you're on Facebook, drop them in the chat. I am watching for comments, and I will happily weave them into the conversation. As we kick off, you say there is a new kind of diversity, yet only 8% of companies recognize it. What kind of diversity are you talking about?
Well, Jean, as you just mentioned, it's about generations and the way we think. And because the generation gap, which by the way was a term that was coined when the baby boomers were the new kids on the block, now is larger than it ever was. And my theory on that, by the way, is when the screens that are in our life went from public to private, we got into silos. So when I
Mm.
first was born, there was one screen in our house, right? The television. In fact, in my house, it was a black and white TV. But fast forward to today, we've all got our own individual screens, don't we, in our hands? And so a parent might know they have a 17-year-old daughter who's on Instagram. They have no idea she has 5 Finsta accounts, fake Instagram, where she's developing personas for herself and talking to Lord knows who. So it's a diversity that's just as acute as ethnic diversity, gender diversity, income diversity, but we don't know how to talk about it. So this book has meant to be a bit of an encyclopedia, giving language to the different generations so we can collaborate in the office rather than collide. That's my goal.
Early in my career, and the phrase generation gap always makes me think about this. I wrote a profile about the Gap, the company, the Gap, which turned out to have been named for that generation gap, which was something the founders were experiencing in their own lives and their own worlds. When we think about these 5 generations in the workplace, how do they how do they uh how do they how are they different?
Yeah,
I mean, I
good
I
question.
know, you know, they're on different sorts of screens, different sorts of communication skills, but really, what are the attributes that make them distinct?
Okay, great question. I'm hoping I can give you a satisfying answer in a minute or two here.
No, it's okay,
Um,
we've got time.
okay, okay. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when I volley back to that question is it's helpful to understand that people develop a little bit like wet cement. So the neural pathways in our brain when we're young are very pliable. The plasticity is very high. That's why children can learn languages rapidly and they can adapt to things and they're agile and so forth. As we get older, it's not that we can't change, but change becomes measurably harder as we age. I think you would agree with that. And so, just like a sidewalk, maybe you can put your handprint in that sidewalk on day one. It's going to take a jackhammer after year one. For
Mhm.
some people, it takes a jackhammer to change their mind once they're 65 years old and kind of stuck in their ways. So I would just say, anybody listening, if you think about a millennial that was developed in the 80s and 90s, their wet cement was shaped by shared technology, shared heroes, shared tragedies, shared music and television. We were shaped by different things. For me, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I was shaped by different things. So that wet cement becomes hardened, and I think we can use it to our advantage. The goal of this book is not to tolerate each other, it's to actually celebrate and make the very most of Gen Z that's coming into the workplace now, having been shaped in the 21st century. They know how to monetize TikTok better than I can. So you see what I'm saying? I would
Yep.
say for people who are over 45 or 50, and we think kids today, that's what we're thinking typically. We need to be thinking, oh, good, kids today. We need what they bring because I don't have that anymore. I'm a little tired. I'm out of ideas, and I need that 22-year-old that's got full of energy and full of creativity. Now, we may need to coach them a little bit more than we needed to coach because college doesn't always get them career ready. It gets them ready for more college. But and we can talk about more if you want to, but I am just absolutely on a warpath to turn this collision into a collaboration and to turn the disadvantages into advantages. That's really what I want when I talk about this kind of diversity.
Well, and as you write in the book, the research has shown that when you have two different ethnicities together, you get better results. The same is
Yes.
true of generations. When you have two
Yeah.
or more generations together, you
Yeah.
you you get better business results,
Yeah.
better business outcomes.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the hallmarks of each of these generations
Yes.
before we talk about how to build those bridges? I mean, when
Yeah.
we're talking about the peak 65 generation, the boomers, what are
Mhm.
the things that hold us up and what are the things that stand in our way?
Okay, great question. So the baby boomers, I'm one of them, by the way. I turned 65 this fall. The baby boomers would be marked by the aftermath of World War II. So we felt pretty large and in charge, even though we didn't do it. We came out of a World War II experience where we helped win a major world war. So again, we felt large and in charge. It was not a time of depression like our parents went through. It was a time of expansion. Shopping malls were popping up everywhere. McDonald's was franchising. It was, this is amazing. And by the way, the boomers felt large and in charge from the beginning. We were called baby boomers because there was a boom of babies beginning 9 months after World War II, if I can say it that way. The gestation period, it was just about 9 months then. So boomers are marked by that. Gen Xers come after baby boomers. We call Gen X because in 1990, 91, those young adults in Gen X were asked, what do you want to be called? And they said, we don't want to be called anything. Call us the X generation. So we called them Gen X. But here's what's interesting, Gene. The first title they were given by social scientists was the baby buster generation.
Oh.
And the reason for that is the first year of their existence was the public introduction of the birth control pill. So instead of a boom, it was millions less babies born. And if you add on top of that Roe v. Wade in 73, you have a shrinking population, not a booming. Well, that affected the economy, that affected enrollment in colleges, employment, and jobs. So a very big shift. After the Gen Xers come the Gen Yers or millennials. They're the kids born in the 80s and 90s, más o menos. And they're called millennials because they'll spend their entire adult life in the new millennium. So both of my kids are millennials. Bethany is 36, Jonathan's 32, and they are now living out the rest of their life in the 21st century. Then after Gen Y or millennials comes Gen Z. These are the new kids on the block. They're the ones we're welcoming into the workplace, or maybe not welcoming them into the workplace very well. They're so different than the Xers and the Boomers 50, 60 years ago, just different. But I am such a believer in Gen Z, and I hope we get a chance to talk about them. Listeners, check this out. Gen Z, while they're very different, they've been shaped by not just cell phones, but smartphones and AI. This is normal and natural for them. But I believe they bring an entrepreneurial mindset. I don't know if you know this, Gene, but 72% of high school students in America want to be an entrepreneur. 72%. Now, will they all succeed? Probably not. But just the fact that they're thinking that way, I want to start something, not just join something. We need to capitalize on that. How could we have entrepreneurial zones in our workplaces where we make it feel like a startup and there's all kinds of zeal and creativity and ideas? They bring a hacker mindset into our workplace, not just technology, but how do you get behind the system, find out how it works and make it work for us? Every employer in the world ought to want that. So
Absolutely.
anyway, those are the kind of the names and the hallmarks. Boomers are marked right now by their ability to coach other generations. We ought to utilize them as coaches and mentors and seize their stories that they can tell where they were growing up in similar economic times. Xers, I think they bring a pragmatism that we need. Like, okay, before we launch this project, let's get behind the scenes and see what could go wrong, and let's fix it before we start. So Gen X is seen as skeptical, but we kind of need that before we get going too far down the idealism road. They bring a contrarian mindset that I think is so helpful. Millennials bring hope and energy and confidence. They still want to change the world by noon on Friday, that sort of thing. So you can see I'm a bit of an optimist, but I am for good reason. Sure, there's a dark side to every one of us. My gosh, on my worst day, I'm not very fun to be with. But if I get to play in my gift zone where I'm most comfortable and you pull out what you need from me, but it's what I have inside, we can now capitalize on every single one of these generations, and we need to today. Yeah.
So that actually is a nice introduction to my next question,
Okay.
which is when you have these 5 different generations in the workplace, you mentioned coaching, but what sort of strategies do employers need to use in order to elicit the best from these
Yeah.
generations and to get the people in these generations to understand each other and help each other rather than butt heads?
Yeah, great question. I've got a couple of thoughts that come to my mind. The best one, though, is the final chapter of this book is something on reverse mentoring. I think the game changer for me as a 65-year-old guy who founded this nonprofit, but I'm the old guy now, I'm the dinosaur. I'm doing reverse mentoring. I do it with Andrew, who's 30 years younger than me. I do it with Cam, who's 40 years younger than me. So reverse mentoring is basically when you get together, 2 different generations, young and old, you swap stories first. You always find something in common when you swap stories and you begin to go, oh my gosh, I like the Chicago Cubs. That's amazing. But after you swap stories, each one of you take an opportunity to mentor the other in your superpowers. So I might share with Cam, boy, here's what I picked up after 40 years of being in my career that you're going to want to accelerate your growth by teaching these right now, by coaching you up, that sort of thing. But then I take my mentor hat off, give it to him, and it's reverse mentoring where he's coaching me on maybe how we can monetize the latest app he just got on his iPhone and how we could use it for marketing or whatever. So this requires the older generations to be humble. We need to
Mm.
approach them with humility, respect, and curiosity. That's what our data shows, by the way. Every generation wants from the others humility, which means I'm coming to you saying, I don't know it all. I could learn from you. Respect, that means I'm going to begin with belief, not suspicion about you young whippersnappers, that sort of thing. And then I love this. The data shows every generation in the workplace said, would you approach me with curiosity? Meaning you can hardly wait to hear what I have to share and see what I have to show. And you want to pick up from me. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine a workplace where there's humility, respect, and curiosity? It would be huge. So that's your assignment, listeners. Reverse mentoring. Find somebody of a different age, and both of you learn from each other. The other item would I say is we do a little exercise called ditch the niche. Have you ever noticed, Gene, we kind of get niches with people that think like we do, talk like we do,
Mhm.
vote like we do. It's
Yes.
easier. We don't want to do the work to connect with somebody that's really different. And I'm saying I am loving getting with clusters of millennials or Xers or whatever and just listening. So when we first released the book, A New Kind of Diversity, I got with Gen Zers, I got with millennials, I got with Xers, I got with boomers, and I said, what words would you use? What approach would you take to reach your people? Well, I got all kinds of different ideas, but I got out of my niche saying, this is how I would say it. Well, good. You'll reach 15% of the audience you want to reach then, Tim. Now I'm reaching 100% of the audience, hopefully, by asking all the generations. But let me give you an analogy, Jen, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, I'm
Sure.
monopolizing this
No, it's
conversation.
great.
Whenever I am with people, I just was with a group of educators in Kansas, and I had such a rich time. But they're superintendents, so they're seasoned veterans, and they're having Gen Z and Alpha generation children go into their schools. Here's what I said. I said, if we were to hop on a plane and fly around the world, let's say we landed in Vietnam, isn't it true as we hop off that plane in Vietnam, we'd be psyched up to work harder to connect with people there, right? Because we already know they speak a different language, they have different customs, they have different values. Bingo. When I get with a Gen Zer, different language, different customs, different values. So if I'm willing to do the work in Vietnam, why am I not willing to do the work right here at home? And by the way, listeners, I don't know, maybe your grandchildren, maybe your
Mm.
children, maybe those colleagues that have so much to offer. You'll never learn it unless you listen. So
It's
I'll
such a
stop
good
there.
point. No, it's such a good point. And you said at the top of this conversation, I hope we get a chance to talk about Gen Z. And
Yeah.
Gen Z has a reputation, you
Yeah.
say in the book, of being the most difficult
Yeah.
uh, generation to work with. I've experienced this. I help uh, I help run a mentorship program for student journalists at my alma mater and have done some work with my school paper. When I was an editor at my school paper, we did what we called side by side editing, where somebody a year older than you would sit next to you, edit your story, and basically tell you all the reasons that it was terrible
Yes.
before they
Yes.
fixed it and made it better. And I was telling one of the current students, we would do this side by side editing. They'd say, your lead sucks. Here's why, and fix it. And she said, well, nobody would say your lead sucks.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody. And so I think that difficult may just be a euphemism for different.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was well put. In fact, I always say, don't get frustrated, get fascinated with the other generation. If we could just see it, it's just a change of, it's like, don't say you're nervous, say you're excited. Same energy,
Hmm.
just going two different directions. When I say, I'm not going to get frustrated, I'm going to become fascinated with this different person. All kinds of good things can happen because my mind's open. So you're really touching on this. Maybe difficult is really just different. And I need to go. I'm going to do the work to really get to know this person and probably learn all kinds of things. Yeah.
When the folks who watch this show typically are a little closer to retirement, by the way, just a reminder, if you're not
Okay.
on the list for our free retirement newsletter, go to our website. It's protectedincome.org/subscribe. You can sign up for it. But the folks who get this who watch the show are typically interested in issues of retirement. They're closer
Yeah.
to retirement than they are to the start of their careers. And as we continue to work longer and stay in the workforce longer, uh, we will deal with Gen Z being pulled into leadership roles.
Yeah.
How would you suggest rolling with that?
Wow. That's a loaded question. You know that, don't you, Gene?
Mm,
Here's two things that come to my mind. I'm actually working on a brand new book called The Future Begins with Z: How Generation Z Will Upset the Workforce and How You Can Capitalize on It. So let me share a major theme from that book, just got a little ahead of time, which incentivizes every listener to go, I got to get this right. Think with me. The age of authority is dropping, meaning young people are coming into the workplace with an intuition on where culture is going and how to use smart technology and AI. They naturally have it. And I can either say darn it, or I can say okay, good, let's get this. So the age of authority is dropping, but the age of maturity is rising. So Gene, I have lost count of the number of university deans that have said to me 26 is the new 18. So in terms of
wow.
social and emotional maturation. So it's not their fault. I think it's the culture we're living in, and maybe mom and dad didn't do a good job getting them ready. But can you see how that would be a confounding to an employer? They're smarter coming in, darn it, but they're not quite as ready coming in. So the simple encouragement I would have to answer your question is I'm going to have to listen a little bit more than I used to listen and coach a little bit more than I used to coach. If I can prepare myself to do that, and I would say that too, if you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, um, we've got to build bridges instead of walls, and we naturally put up walls if we think it's going to be too much work to
I,
connect.
I've heard you use the word coach a couple of times.
Yes,
What do you
yeah,
mean? And for those of us who have never coached a sport, or
yes,
how
yeah.
how do we what are the hallmarks of good coaching?
Okay. Well, I think this is just me. I'm just one guy. So people, you can differ in your opinions, but I think it's got to begin with relationship. The younger two generations, who we're going to call modern geniuses, to use Chip Conley's words, I think the workplace is full of modern elders and young geniuses. I think that's a good spin on what's going on. I think I'm going to have to build a relationship. We've got to build bridges of relationship that can bear the weight of honest disclosure. Because you're right. If you were an editor back in our day, that sucks. You need to fix it. And you heard, oh, we would never say that today. It's true. Sometimes they're more fragile than agile. So I would say build a relationship. The second thing I would say is um, I want to give you an acronym, listeners. And if you're making mental notes or you're able to take notes, you know how we've used a phrase, Gene, forever, never, never, never. This is the leg you got to stand on, which means this is something you can bank on. I use the letters ALEG to guide me when I'm going to coach a young team member. So the letter A reminds me, instead of telling them or correcting them first, I ask. I ask them questions like, tell me what your thinking was when you did that. And not what were you thinking? Not that, but what was your thought process? Have you ever thought about this, Gene? When we ask a question like that, we're actually valuing them. When we're
Mhm.
asked questions, we feel valued. So the boss, who may be 65, is saying, tell me what your thought process was. I might have done it differently, but that's very intriguing. So I begin with asking. When I ask, they feel valued. The letter L, I got to listen well. It does very little good to ask questions unless I'm really willing to listen. When I listen, they feel heard. And by the way, the number one cry of Generation Z on surveys is they want a voice. They want to feel heard from day one, by the way. And of course, we're going, I would have never assumed my boss would listen to me on day one. They do assume. So ask, they feel valued. Listen, they feel heard. The letter E, empathize. When I empathize, they feel understood. So, Gene, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to confess my sins here. I've had to learn to say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Or I bet that made you feel awful when that happened. Those kinds of things. And sometimes I think ladies are better than gentlemen at this, but I've had to learn to really express, I'm hearing you and understanding you. Now think about it. When I listen, they feel understood. Now I get to letter G. And that's what I wanted to do from the beginning, which is to guide them. But it began with relationship building, asking, listening, and empathizing. Now I've earned my right to talk to that young journalist who probably sucks at what they just wrote down. But I get to say, can I offer a little bit of input that might make you even better? And that doesn't feel quite as stingy. It doesn't sting quite as much. Now, I know some of you are listening go, are you kidding me? I'm taking 20 minutes to get to that. Well, if you do that enough times, you've earned their trust. And when you've earned their trust, it accelerates your ability to say hard things later. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there, but I'm thinking that's a good strategy.
Yeah, I just want to shout out to Peter and everybody else who's watching. Don't hold your questions. Put your questions in the chat. I am happy to weave them into the conversation. I don't have a way to bring you up live on stage, but I'm happy to give you a voice by asking your questions. So we were talking about boomers trying to help Gen Z, Gen Xers trying to help Gen Z.
Yeah.
Flip it for me. We know that nearly half, 48% of peak 65 consumers don't think that their retirement savings are sufficient. Result, they're spending more years in the workforce.
Yeah.
Gen Xers, Gen Zers are becoming the bosses, right?
Yeah.
Millennials are becoming the bosses. So what do the members of these younger generations need to do in order to retain the older talent?
Wow. Great question. You know, the first things that come to my mind, Gene, are soft skills, not hard skills. So I don't know if this is good or bad, but I am such a believer that we need to build emotional intelligence into our own lives and into the lives of those around us if we're employers or bosses or supervisors. So I believe if I'm younger, well, I'll give you a good example. Right out of the college, I began to work for Dr. John C. Maxwell, this New York Times bestselling author in leadership. I started with him early 80s. I remember wanting to influence him, and he was clearly the strongest leader in the room. It's by far. But I remember practicing humility and earning my right to speak to him. I wasn't cocky or arrogant. I think I was humble, and I was productive. So when we're young, but we're producing, people listen to us. If I'm not producing, good luck with that, you know? So we'll never replace earning the right to influence by do your job well, be excellent at what you do, and then humbly broach the subject that you want to broach. And I would say, John, have you ever thought about this? And of course, I was 23 years old. Well, I thought a little bit about, well, you know, here's what I'm thinking, you know, and I feel like I earned my right to speak through some of those productivity and soft skills than ever before, or than I would have just assuming he's going to listen. But I just had a thought cross my mind, and my thoughts get lonely up here, so I'd better let it out. Arthur Brooks at Harvard University released a great book called From Strength to Strength. I just love it.
Yep.
And in that book, he talks about Dr. Raymond Cattell's research from the 1970s. I think we forgot about it, but he brings it up again. He says your brain morphs over your lifetime. In the first 40 years, you experience fluid intelligence. In your second 40, crystallized intelligence. So your first 40 years, fluid intelligence would be about adapting and innovating. In your second 40, crystallized would be about clarifying and summarizing. One is I learn things quickly. One is I teach things quickly. Well, I want both of those at my workplace. Yep. I want everything. So maybe the answer to your question is know where you stand in your life station and capitalize on what your brain is strong at. So if I was a Gen Z supervisor, I'd say, oh, you guys over 50, I welcome you. Please help me. I could use your help. And then, you know, I want to play my card and say, I got some ideas here. I love how Bob Iger started at Disney way back in 2006. You might remember he wrote his autobiography, and he said, when I took over Disney, I had led ABC, but I didn't know how to lead a conglomerate of a company that sold plush toys, theme park tickets, movie tickets, you know. So he had confidence and humility. Confidence and humility. He said, I had to be humble and not try to pretend like I knew what the heck I was doing with animation. So he went to his direct reports and said, you got to help me here. You're brilliant. I'm not. Help me out. Well, you can imagine that caused his team members to lean in. They said, you're
Sure.
asking me for help? Absolutely, I'll help you. But then Bob said, you can't let your humility keep you from leading. You had to run point. So it's a beautiful paradox of confidence and humility. Your confidence makes your leadership believable, but your humility makes your confidence believable. You see that?
Yep.
So it's a tender balance of a high self-awareness with my team members. So I'll stop there.
It's such good no, it's such great advice, and I love the real life example. We're still reading about Bob Iger today as
Yeah,
he
true.
searches for the next person to succeed him.
That's right.
We only have a couple of minutes left, and I'd love to leave people with some takeaways for existence, not just existence, but for really being able to navigate this multi-generational workplace and
Mm,
world with ease. If
yeah.
you if you had to pick your top 3 tips for
Mm.
existing in this new paradigm, what would they be?
You ask great questions, Gene. I wish I had great answers. I'm going to do my best here. I want to go back to that listening thing. As trite and cliche as that sounds, those of us over 40 don't always listen very well. We think, I know what I'm doing. I've done this for years, et cetera, et cetera. I am learning to listen. I'll be honest with you. I'm learning to listen better to my 36-year-old daughter. It's been a game changer. So the assignment I have given myself that might be a good tip is this. In a meeting, speak as if you believe you're right, but listen as if you believe you're wrong. Oh my gosh, has that been a game changer? And when I do it to my daughter, I can see her face. It's just, I mean, dad's written 40 books. What is it? Why is he listening to me? Because I love you and I believe you probably have something to share with me. So listeners, I'm telling you, if you're older, can I just say that? If you're older, learn to listen as if you might be wrong. That's tip number one.
Love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Somebody should put that on a mug.
Yeah. I think or a bumper sticker or something like that. Oh my gosh, my generation needs that desperately. The second thing I would say is also something I've said before. Practice reverse mentoring. How about this next week? Find somebody that's way younger or way older, depending on who you are, and just say, could I take you to coffee? And then they're going to wonder, what? Am I in trouble? No, no. I want to learn from you. And I want to pour into you both. So do that little reverse mentoring, swap stories, listen and learn, coach and coach, coach and coach. I just think that's been so much fun for me. I don't get paid a dime to do it, but it's my favorite thing I do is that. I think those are the main things that I would say. But you know what, Gene? Let me just say one more thing that might be weird and maybe even
Weird is
inappropriate.
fine. Weird is good.
You're okay with weird. This sounds strange, I know, but buckle up. I think for leaders, seasoned people that are a little older, we need to learn to love our people. And I don't mean that in a weird romantic way. I'm just saying I want the team that's at my office to see me as an older gentleman who's been around the block a couple of times. But first and foremost, I love them. I want them to know that no one is more important than our mission, but everyone is more important than their job. And so, can I just encourage you, if you're still working or you're living and you're interacting with different generations, love on those people that are different than you. I'm telling you, you're going to get love right back, I think. So that's my advice.
Dr. Tim Elmore, the book is A New Kind of Diversity. Where should we go to get more information about you and your incredible work?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking, Gene. The quickest way to get information and even free stuff is timelmore.com. So just my name, timelmore.com. There's even a free ebook on there that's the glass is still half full, and I talk about how to lead Gen Z. So timulmer.com. And then also, if you're interested in kids and the next generation, growingleaders.com. That would be where to go for that. So thanks for asking.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I love free stuff, so I'm definitely checking it out. And for more information on the work of the Alliance for Lifetime Income, in addition to subscribing to our newsletter on all things retirement, please go to protectedincome.org/subscribe. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye, Tim. Thank you.